Your Nolan family historian, back again with another episode about the history of how our Nolan family came to be. As we approach Grandma Helen's and Grandpa Mike's 81st wedding anniversary, I produced the following account as a celebration of how they were introduced in the fall of 1942 in Berkeley, California, after having come to California individually from Minnesota, fell in love, and were married in Reno, Nevada on September 4, 1943. This episode is titled Two Orphans Plus the War Equals the Making of a Family, or How Grandpa Mike and Grandma Helen Escaped the Stain of Their Orphan Origins. As you will see, it was the events of World War II that brought them together. Ironically, had it not been for the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, it is unlikely either Grandpa Mike or Grandma Helen would have ever left Minnesota to come to California, and thus they would never have met, and none of us would exist today. Was it fate or in serendipity that brought them together? Included are snippets from some of their love letters, which were found in their effects after they had passed. So we get to spy a bit into the privacy of their romantic adventures back in 1942. Woohoo! Also included are some details about Grandpa Mike's colorful young adult life that have not previously been revealed. Secrets about his life that he took with him to his grave, only to be discovered through my family history research over the last few years. Lots more details about those events, but too much to go into in this discussion focused on Grandpa Mike's and Grandma Helen's courtship. So, some intriguing additional facets of our rather picturesque Nolan family history for you to contemplate. More details upon request. So sit back for the next 14 minutes or so and enjoy the show. This is the story of how my parents met. I call this story Two Orphans Plus the War Equals the Making of a Family, or How My Parents Escaped the Stain of Their Orphan Origins. Both my mom and dad were orphans, but from very different circumstances. This is the story of how Michael Nolan and Helen Kalasa came together in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1942. My dad, Michael Nolan, was born in New York City in 1910. His mother was a 16-year-old unmarried Irish girl who had been born in Brooklyn. The identity of my dad's father was finally determined through DNA analysis in 2022. Michael lived the first 6 years of his life at the New York Foundling Hospital, which was actually a large Catholic orphanage in Manhattan. In November 1916, at 6 years of age, Michael rode one of the orphan trains of that era to Minnesota to live with a foster family. That odyssey took 2.5 days, sitting on a hard wooden bench the entire journey. The rest of his childhood and early adult years, my dad lived in Minnesota. My mom, Helen Kalasa, was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1920, the fourth born of 8 children of Polish immigrant parents. When Helen was 5 years of age, her mother died 7 days after the birth of her 8th child. Helen's father, being more committed to the bottle than his family, abandoned his children to the custody of St. Joseph's German Catholic Orphan Asylum in St. Paul, Minnesota. My mom never saw her father again. In 1930, when Helen was 10 years of age, she was sent to live and work on the farm of a German foster family. She lived and worked with her foster family until 1935, when she was removed because of mistreatment and returned to Minneapolis to complete her high school education at Miller Vocational High School in a commercial cooking curriculum. In 1937, she graduated at 17 years of age, still under the custody of the Catholic Welfare Service, and was promptly placed working as a full-time live-in maid with a series of families. My dad found a different way to survive. In 1931, he was 21 years old. He left the farm of his foster family. This was the midst of the Depression, with 25% unemployment, and people trying to survive by selling apples on street corners. Dad still left the home of his foster parents to strike out on his own. He never returned to his foster home. This was rather illustrative of his feelings about the treatment he endured there. Struggling to survive, Dad got himself caught up in an unsavory crowd, made some stupid decisions, stole some money and cars, was caught, convicted, and sent to the big house. Michael's older brother had become homeless about the same time, living on the streets of Minneapolis and eating at rescue missions, while Dad got 3 hots and a cot, as the saying goes in the military, while in prison. So which of them got the better deal? Dad took his prison time secret to his grave. I uncovered this sordid details several years ago, and now have a complete copy of his arrest, conviction, and prison records, including newspaper accounts of his escapades. Intriguing reading, including info about my dad's psychic and emotional health as a result of being neglected and abused by his foster father. Clearly, there was no love there, just work. Then came the day that will live in infamy, the December 7th, 1941 surprise attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan. Sometime in the spring of 1942, my mom quit her job as a live-in maid to make a better life for herself. That summer, she traveled by Greyhound bus to Jacksonville, Florida, to visit her brother, who was in the Marine Corps training for deployment to Guadalcanal. Upon her return to Minneapolis, my mom took a job at a defense plant, manufacturing the so-called May West life vests. In May of 42, as the Battle of Corregidor raged in the Philippines, the U.S. military was ramping up its mobilization efforts, and nonviolent convicts were offered early release to join the war effort. So my dad was released May 11, 1942. However, he did not qualify for military service because he had full dentures. All his teeth had been pulled while he was in prison because of gum disease. A man had to have at least half his natural teeth to qualify for military service. So my dad, along with several other men, headed out to get some kicks on Route 66 to Richmond, California, to work at the Kaiser Industries shipyards, building Liberty ships for the war effort. The shipyards worked around the clock, 24/7, 365. My dad became a welder. In October of 42, the Marines landed on Guadalcanal. At that same time, one of my mom's co-workers at the defense plant in Minneapolis said she was leaving to head to California to join her husband, who was working at the Kaiser Industries shipyards in Richmond. My mom's friend convinced Helen that she too should head to California for better employment opportunities. So having become comfortable with the adventure of travel, Mom quit her job, closed her savings account, withdrew the $50 she had saved up, and bought a one-way train ticket to Berkeley, California. She arrived sometime around mid-October and took a room at 2070 University Avenue, just 2 blocks from the UC campus. A 22-year-old young single woman, free at last from the bondage of her orphan foster kid origins. She took a job as a telephone operator. Lily Tomlin's character, Ernestine, the telephone operator from the 1970s TV show Laugh-In, comes to mind. Number, please. But I'm dating myself. My 4 daughters and grandkids would ask, what's a telephone operator? The husband of my mom's friend from the defense plant in Minneapolis worked with my dad at the shipyards. By early November 1942, my mom and my dad had been introduced by my dad's co-worker and my mom's friend, Lil and Earl first now. So a budding romance and courtship began. Now, let us pry into my parents' privacy a bit with a few excerpts from some of their ensuing love letters. November 16, 1942. Helen to Mike. Dear Mike, here I am, off to a flying start. Been writing you with a few lines as you asked me to do. Why don't you call me Wednesday afternoon about 4:30 or 4:45? I'll be home and we'll discuss it then if the weather is favorable. Lil and Earl won't know it either, as there is a phone up here and the proprietor rings a buzzer when you get a call. Lil was the one who said, what did you and Mike do after we left, as he didn't get to work until 4 o'clock? She also added, I think you're leading Mike astray. I said we went to a movie and you put me on a bus and I didn't know what you did after that. That shut her up. Burn this letter so no one else gets it. 1 week later, November 23rd. Dear Mike, the letter of yours was darling. You sure have beautiful script, as you call it. I didn't know what to take of some of it, but we'll talk that over Wednesday Eve. I'm afraid you're going to have a hard time convincing me on some of those things. You're a very persistent guy and never seem to give up hope. It's really something to be admired. One thing I'm not going to do is stay overnight with you Wednesday night, or vice versa. You'll probably feel hurt when you read this, but after all, I have a little self-respect to keep. I hope. I'm beginning to wonder if I have any left. I've done so many things that I wouldn't have dreamt of doing back in Minneapolis. Don't get the idea I'm putting a bad reflection on you. You couldn't be any sweeter or nice to me. Well, dearie, I must close and get some shut-eye so I can work well tomorrow. Love, Helen. Fortunately, my dad did not follow my mom's instructions to burn her letters. However, none of my dad's letters to my mom seem to have survived. My mom must have taken her own advice and burned them. Too bad, because while my dad could not spell worth a damn and his grammar was atrocious, his penmanship was like calligraphy. He also had quite a poetic streak, so some of his letters to my mom were probably rather saucy. So, probably sometime around August 1943, my dad had popped the question. He paid $500 for the ring, a tidy sum in those days, which equals about $9,000 today. I have the purchase records. Not long after, they were headed to Reno, Nevada by train out of Oakland, California. There were no blood test requirements for marriage license in Nevada. Plus, Reno was known as the marriage capital of the world at that time. Vegas was nothing but a dust bowl back then. On September 4th, 1943, one day after the start of the Allied landing at Salerno, Italy, Michael Nolan and Helen Colossa, two Catholic orphans, were married by a, wait for it, Baptist minister. 3 months later, my mom was pregnant with my sister. And 5 days after the liberation of Paris, my sister, Leilani, my parents loved that popular song of the time, Sweet Leilani, Heavenly Flower, was born on August 30th, 1944, in Oakland. Soon after, the Nolan family moved to San Jose, where my dad had begun running an ice delivery business. Imagine, if you will, my dad, 5'3" tall, 100 pounds soaking wet, pumping 200-pound blocks of ice to homes and businesses in San Jose. 6 months after the end of the war, Valentine's Day, 1946, my mom again became pregnant with me. So I like to think of myself as a love child. I was born November 15, 1946, at San Jose Hospital. I recall my mom talking about the roof at the hospital leaking while she was in labor, with buckets all over the delivery room floor to catch the drips. You might say I was baptized before I was even fully born. The Nolan family was now complete. We lived at 758 Chestnut Street, San Jose. My dad, probably with lots of influence from my mom, got his life straight, was never arrested again. He never revealed his prison time history to me or my sister. He took that secret to his grave. I wonder if he ever told my mom. I discovered his secret several years ago when I began researching his origins. Caught you, Dad, but you are forgiven. Somehow, my parents moved beyond their childhood traumas of neglect and rejection and the punishment doled out by the good sisters at the orphanages with their trusty rulers always at the ready, and their foster fathers with their leather belts always at the ready, to raise a fairly functional, intact family. In California, my parents had found a way to escape the social stain of their orphan origins. Their marriage was not always pretty. Sometimes it was downright ugly. My mom and dad, two orphans who found each other and made it through thick and thin to the end. Serendipity had brought them and kept them together. No one else could have understood the lifelong effects of their childhood traumas. I love you, Mom and Dad. May the blessings be with you in the spirit world. Pearl Harbor and the horrors of World War II had brought two orphans from Minnesota together in the San Francisco Bay Area. They never would have met otherwise. So in a way, you could say my sister and I owe our very existence to the attack on Pearl Harbor and the horrors of World War II. As Henry Louis Gates often asks his guests on Finding Your Roots, how does knowing that make you feel? I am without words to respond.